Coming up on the Razzball Fantasy Football Podcast, we discuss the wide receiver starts of the week using our slot versus wide tool. Join us as we break down the 5 biggest matchup upgrades for wide receivers in week 6, starting right now on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. And to help guide me through this tumultuous podcast that I'm already off to is Ben Wasley. Ben's honestly, this week for me, week 6, how is fantasy football going for you? Honestly, right now, your fantasy teams, we talk a lot about, advice, but sometimes we don't just take a second to think, how are our teams doing? How are you doing this season in fantasy? Are you feeling good about your teams?
I am actually feeling pretty good. I've had one of those weird seasons where I feel like I'm getting wins that I don't deserve sometimes. You're kind of looking at your teams going like, this team isn't very good. But it's like 4-1 or 3-2, and you're like, I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know if I'd rather have a really good record and a bad team or a good team and a terrible record, because at this time of the season, I feel like you can turn it around. But I'm feeling nervous. But it's going well. Like, I just don't want to tempt fate or anything like that. We had a ding dong battle last week in a league we're in together. So look, it's going well so far. But fingers crossed it lasts.
Yeah, our league is actually every one of my teams except one has a winning record. The one league I'm not is the Gridiron. I blew it. The Gridiron, honestly, I sat Amari Cooper 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and he went off against the Giants, and I lost because of that move, and I'm like, that was stupid. And then this week, I didn't play Mooney. That's a tough pill to swallow. Probably would have lost anyway. I don't even remember what our final score was, but that team that's on me. I'm a bad head coach in that league. That's coaching decisions. I take full responsibility. So, but overall, I have one league where I lost Cooper Kupp, Rashid Rice, Nico Collins, and I'm just like, all right, like, good thing I was 4-1 heading into this week, but like, I might be 4-4 very fast. So, it's like there's this leagues like that where injuries hit you at the same position and you're just kind of SOL. But honestly, hopefully today we can kind of talk through some of the wide receiver players, maybe some deeper names to kind of plug in. Obviously, as everybody knows, this is the slot versus wide points per game allowed analysis show. If you haven't checked it out on Razzball.com, we have taken it a step further for fantasy points allowed by defense, looking at it from slot versus out wide. So it's a really cool tool to understand, okay, where are the fantasy points coming from? Why is that important? Because some guys are just slot receivers. Some guys play majority out wide. So it's important to know where those fantasy points are being given up. And we also include fantasy points scored by player too on the website. So go check it out on Razzball.com. Before we dive in, we got a couple regulars. Bill Dino. Oh, pleasure, Bill. Honestly, seeing your face on a Friday is nice, but Bill's a mainstay on the weekends too, so good to see him in. Epic Fail. By the way, Epic Fail. If anything, you might need to update your name. It might be Epic. Like, you're not failing at all at this point. You're showing up. You're here. You're like, not a fail. What's Epic Success? Maybe, I don't know. I don't know what the opposite should be, but I think you're not a fail anymore. Got a couple questions. Epic Fail, we promise we will get to you. Obviously, the kicker analysis, the most important analysis. By the way, I will give you a heads up, a very tough week for streamers. Matthew Wright was your best shot on Thursday nights, but it is what it is. We can kind of talk about some names there as well. On today's show, we're going to be talking about the slot versus wide analysis for week 6, the biggest matchup upgrades out wide, the top 5. So some of these names are going to be obvious. If you go to the site, you can see which fantasy teams allow the most fantasy points out wide. Today's show is to tell you which players have the biggest upgrade versus their early season schedule. So weeks 1 through 5, comparing it to week 6, and which players have the biggest upgrade. So starting at the top, the Chicago Bears are playing the Jacksonville Jaguars this weekend. Boy, oh boy, do the Jags love giving up fantasy points out wide this season. And they are by far the number one matchup. The Bears have had some good matchups along the way, but nothing tops this one. The question is, obviously, DJ Moore is a rock-solid play this week, but players like Roma Dunze, for example, maybe even Keenan Allen, who plays more in the slot, still a good matchup. Ben, what do you think about the Bears overall as a receiving core this week?
It's one of those funny things where a couple of weeks ago, if you'd said, oh, yeah, you absolutely need to start DJ Moore, people would have gone, oh, really? because he had a terrible start to the season, but he's now starting to look very, very solid. Last week he looked good. I expect this week he's going to be a top 10 start for me. Caleb Williams has started to look like what we thought he potentially could be. Admittedly, he's had some nice matchups with helps, but you don't get nicer matchups than this one here. So I think Williams should be able to be very good as well. In fact, Williams is a top 10 quarterback for this week. The question is, what about Rome Odunze? Is he suddenly someone we can use? He seems to be kind of sharing those 12 personnel snaps with Keenan Allen at the moment, which makes it a little bit awkward. But he's certainly got a high enough route count that I feel like you can feel good about starting him as kind of like a very low-end flex option. Keenan Allen's kind of in that same category. Obviously, he doesn't spend anywhere near as much time out wide, but I think he is someone that you can still start feasibly this week. There are a lot of people that are going to be dealing with bye week issues and injuries. And if you're one of those people, I feel like Allen or Odunze is someone that might be available, could potentially be on your bench. And you can feel okay about putting them in because you've got to feel like there's going to be a heap of points in this game.
The other thing I like too, the Bears defense has been good. Little trouble stopping the run, but overall in the passing, but they're going to be down some key guys in the secondary this week. So I think that Jacksonville has a shot. Of course, the Bears are traveling overseas. They're playing this game in London. Jags do have a little bit of advantage. They've done this plenty of times, so it could be helping them. But I like the fact that the Bears defense is a little banged up. Could help Trevor Lawrence. Could help put up some points. So I like that concept there. DJ Moore to me is someone that I'll probably be monitoring for like DFS pricing and player props this week because I really like the matchup. He's the go-to guy. Rome Odunze, to me, this is like the spot. Like if you have him on your roster right now, this is the week you should feel the most comfortable starting him as a wide receiver 3. So if you do have Rome Odunze, bring him to the Sunday live show and give us your start-sit questions because I think that's going to be a guy who I might play over a lot of guys in tougher matchups because he is getting the routes. Caleb Williams is playing better, and the matchup doesn't get much better than that. Let's jump down to number 2. It's the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons this week are facing the Carolina Panthers. Of course, I knew that already. The Panthers have been getting crushed all season, pretty much out wide. And now, so this one, to me, like Drake London and Mooney are coming off big games. And I talked about this a few days ago, Ben, and I know you probably haven't seen it yet, but I did a rest of season the next 5 weeks for strength of schedules for slot versus wide. And I talked a little bit about the Falcons and how, people might think Darnell Mooney is a sell high. In reality, the matchups are really good for the Falcons, and you should probably just keep him because he's going to probably give you wide receiver 2 numbers. Now, the question comes, like, is Drake London and Darnell Mooney auto starts this week in the plus matchup, or they're on the road? Who knows what Andy Dalton's going to show up, and does the Panthers not put up enough points to support these guys? What's your thoughts about this one?
I mean, coming into the season, we kind of thought, the Falcons, they're going to look a lot like the Rams have in the past. They're going to play a lot of 11 personnel. They're going to really feature their wide receivers. And then we saw they've got Darnell Mooney and Ray McCloud. And we went, are they really still going to be able to do that? And I think that was the big question mark coming in. Are they going to be able to look like the Rams with the personnel that we've got? Well, the reality is, yes, they are. They've got Drake London and they've got Darnell Mooney. They're the 2 big wide receivers, just like your Cooper Kupp and your Puka Nacua. So they are definitely going to feature the wide receivers. And I know that Darnell Mooney's had some boom weeks, but he is consistently in that role. That is a role that they are having him play, and he's going to continue to play that. He's going to get some really good matchups, but he is also legitimately one of their big guys that they're going to use consistently. They're not going to run the ball enough like they did last year to feel like you're going to lose that opportunity for passing yards. And even in this matchup, where realistically you can beat Carolina just on the ground, I don't think they're going to run this game out. I don't think we're going to see so much Bijan and Algier that we don't see the wide receivers. There is that sort of risk where when you've got this many weapons, when you've got Bijan, when you've got Drake London, when you've got Kyle Pitts, all of a sudden does Darnell Mooney fall down the pecking order? I think we've seen that's not really what happened so far this year, and there's no reason to believe it's going to happen this week. I feel like Mooney's still going to get his opportunities. He's going to have more bust weeks than your average top player, but you're not playing him as a top player. You're playing him as kind of like a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3. And when you're expecting him to give you that sort of output, you're going to be really happy with what you end up getting. So for me, he's someone that I'm definitely starting this week.
Yeah, the other thing with this situation that I like to look at when you have these two dynamic wide receivers, like how many times does the defense allow two guys to produce? So remember, we're banking on London and Mooney, and it's been kind of a mixed bag. Week one, it was Shaheed that went off. It wasn't Olave. Olave had a bad game. Same thing goes for the Chargers, which the Chargers are the Chargers. But Quentin Johnson had the big game, and Palmer didn't do much. But then you look at the Raiders; they had both big games. Myers and Devontae Adams, Chase and Higgins both put up decent. Higgins was more of a wide receiver 3, but Chase had a really nice day. And then last week it was all DJ Moore. So it is a little bit of a mixed bag, but at this point, I just feel like Mooney has moved to a spot where I feel like he's a 1B instead of a 2. So I'm not going to sit here and start London and say sit Mooney. I'm going to say, listen, you start both these guys. The matchup's great, and just hope that it's your guy that ends up getting the most points. But there's definitely been scenarios where both guys, or two receivers, have performed against the Panthers. All right, the third matchup upgrade this week. And the man that I highlighted in the article, filling in for Matt this week, I wrote starts of the week is Zay Flowers and company and the Ravens. Even Rashad Bateman going up against the Washington Commanders. This one should be fun. Now, the Ravens defense could have something to say, but the Ravens defense is really good at stopping the run, maybe a little bit iffy in the past game. We just saw the Bengals really blow up last week. This one could be a barn burner, folks. And this is kind of the game where you're like, I want to invest in these guys. So what's your thoughts about Zay Flowers? Is he an auto start? Are you taking a flyer on Rashad Bateman this week?
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one where for, I don't know, seasons now, I feel like whenever we've done these articles and whenever we've had these shows, we've always said, you're playing against Washington, just start everybody. Like, Washington's got the worst secondary in the league. You absolutely have to take them on. The last couple of weeks, they've looked okay. Now, okay by Washington standards is still terrible by everyone else's standards, but they're no longer the absolute must-start matchup that they used to be. They're now kind of just a plus matchup. And in a plus matchup, I'm definitely starting Zay Flowers. I'm starting Zay Flowers most weeks, realistically. So against Washington, Flowers is someone that has to be in your lineups. I think the real question is, well, what does that say about someone like a Rashad Bateman? Are we going to see enough Derrick Henry? Because you can certainly run on Washington as well. So much Derrick Henry that they don't need to use their other guys. Are they going to lean on the tight ends again? Because it could be a bit of a shootout and they're going to want to use their tight ends like they did last week. That's the big question mark, I think. For me, Bateman is someone I'm happy to take a flyer on in DFS. I certainly think the upside's there. And if you're desperate because you're having issues, I think I'll probably rank him just like on the very low end of like the wide receiver 4s, which means that if you've got a lot of guys on bye weeks and injuries and you're starting to get these names that we really feel uncomfortable with, if you're thinking like, do I start Alec Pierce or Rashad Bateman? Then I'm starting to think Bateman because Bateman's got that great matchup. But if you're comparing him to guys that are weekly producing or guys with other good matchup like a Rome Odunze, then I prefer the other guy over Bateman.
So let's see. Deontay Johnson or Bateman?
Oh, Johnson by a mile.
Okay. Let's see. Jacoby Myers or Bateman?
That's a good one. I would go with Myers myself. I feel like he's more than like in that DeAndre Hopkins, Jalen Tolbert sort of area, like Romeo Dobbs, those sorts of guys. They're the guys I'd mainly be comparing him to, and I'd still take all of those guys over Bateman.
Okay. So, like, you're thinking wide receiver 4.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think Zay Flowers is guy that he's like my start of the week. I think this is the perfect game for him. And Bateman, and if you just look at the numbers for Baltimore, they have allowed a lot of duos to at least get 13 fantasy points. It was the Chiefs in week 1, Dallas in week 3, and then of course Cincinnati in week 5. So 3 of the 5 weeks, multiple guys have at least 13 fantasy points in PPR. So yeah, I think he's starting to earn some targets. I think it's also just the upside of the game. I think the Ravens defense being a little banged up could help. I mean, they did bring back Dean Pease. I don't know what that means. We'll see. Maybe he can bring some veteran mindset coaching to that squad. But overall, I think it's going to be a fun game. So I'm going to try to invest where I can. All right, number 4 is the Arizona Cardinals. Obviously, this is one of those things where I think if you got player props in DFS, I think Marvin Harrison is one of those guys you can definitely add to those lineups this week. And I don't think we necessarily need to worry about him against Green Bay, especially with Jair Alexander missing last week, a little banged up as well. But the real question is guys like Michael Wilson, for example, who has popped up for some games here and there. What's your thoughts about the Arizona Cardinals? Has Marvin Harrison, is he an auto start, or do you have some reservations? And is Michael Wilson definitely streamable this week for you?
I mean, it's hard to feel really good about Marvin Harrison just because of how this Cardinals team plays. They do have enough weapons and they will lean a lot on a James Conner and a Trey McBride in certain situations. But I feel like this is a situation where they're going to need to throw. This could easily be a shootout. I'd be expecting a reasonable amount of points in this game. I know that Vegas has Cardinals behind and chasing in a relatively high-scoring game. And in that sort of situation, you generally see a lot of wide receivers. So I feel like Harrison's someone you can feel pretty good about. Michael Wilson, I'm a bit nervous about. He's starting to just randomly lose snaps to low-end wide receivers. And the biggest concern for me with Michael Wilson is that Zay Jones' suspension ends this week. So do we see Zay Jones come in and start taking snaps away from him? Is he going to be taking snaps away from Greg Dortch instead? We're even seeing guys like Pascal and Chris Moore getting involved and getting 8 or 10 snaps a week. And that's just enough to make it a bit of an issue for Wilson, where suddenly he's losing 20% of his possible routes. And that's enough to affect him. So that moves Wilson from what should be like a viable flex option to more of that Rashad Bateman situation where you kind of like low-end wide receiver 4. Don't feel particularly good about him, but there is certainly upside here.
So he had 2 targets in each of the first 2 games, and then he has 9, 7, and 6. He had 5 receptions for 78 yards last week against San Francisco. So it seems like to me he might be trending in the right direction. The Zay Flowers nugget, though, is annoyingly a thing. It could actually happen. Like Zay Flowers, just 2 years ago was a very productive receiver, dealt with a lot of injuries, then he got suspended. So I don't think it's Zay Flowers. I don't want to just ignore Zay Flowers and poo-poo because it could definitely happen.
Zay Jones,
Zay Jones, sorry.
Yeah.
Too many Zays. By the way, the only time we'll ever talk about 2 Zays back-to-back ever probably. But yeah, Zay Jones. So my mindset here is I actually think if you don't get cute like Bo Melton, like I got cute last week with Bo Melton, right? But this is the type of player where he is getting the routes. He is on the field. He's got a good quarterback, and he's got a good matchup. So, yeah, if you are struggling, if you have guys on bye this week, yes, Michael Wilson is an option. I think he will put up double-digit fantasy points this week in PPR for you. Is he going to win you your week? Probably not. Marvin Harrison's probably that guy. But overall, I think it's definitely an option this week. All right. Number 5, the last one we're going to cover today, is an interesting one because Will Levis has been named the starter again, very up and down. They get the Colts. Now, the Colts have been a barn burner. A lot of fun to play against. Ask Trevor Lawrence how much he likes playing the Colts. But now the issue is there's a lot of target competition. You have Hopkins, you have Ridley, you have Boyd. And so without consistent quarterback play, is there any confidence that you could put in Hopkins and Ridley this week in a very good matchup against a banged-up Colts team? What's your thoughts here, Ben?
I think Ridley's the guy that you're most interested in. He is kind of playing as the clear wide receiver 1 in a snap count sort of perspective. He's the guy that's out there the most. So he's the one you can feel most confident in. For me, he's the first guy we've really talked about, who's in that wide receiver 3 sort of range where you can feel okay about him. He's got upside, but the floor's also very low because the floor of every Titans wide receiver is very low. The real question mark is, what do you do with DeAndre Hopkins? He came into the season injured and he was getting very limited snaps early on in the season. But the last 2 weeks, he's only run 22 and 13 routes. Now, to be fair, he's getting a target on a third of those routes. So they're putting him out there when they're planning on having him be the first look or when they're planning on passing the ball. So potentially there is a situation here where Hopkins is just very consistent but not out on the field enough. I don't really trust that. That really limits your upside. It limits the potential for how many points you're going to be able to score. Basically, the ceiling cap is really low on Nook this season in general. And I don't see that being an injury thing anymore because it's been full practicing the last 3 weeks. So it's not like they're limiting him from an injury perspective. It just feels like it's kind of like, this guy's old. We can only have him out there a certain amount of the time. We don't want to risk injuring him, so we're only going to use him when we absolutely have to. It's really not making me feel good about him for fantasy. So he kind of goes into that same category as your Rashad Bateman's, as your Michael Wilsons, of guys that aren't playing every snap, are going to be very boom bust, are going to have some good weeks, but really have a capped ceiling.
Yeah. Will Levis is my problem. He's just streaky. Like, I don't even know what to expect for him. Like, the difference between like a Hopkins type player, even Ridley to an extent, is like I know what I'm getting from Kyler Murray. Like, I know what I'm getting from him. He's a good football player. He's knows the off. He's playing well. He's consistent. Like, that gives me a little more confidence to a Michael Wilson. And Rashad Bateman, same thing. You're getting Lamar Jackson. You know what you're getting to an extent. This one, like, I don't even know what the hell Will Levis is going to show up. And, like, so it just makes me pause to think, like, we haven't really seen a full plethora of Hopkins, Ridley, Boyd playing full snaps on the same field with Will Levis as a quarterback. We haven't seen it yet. And so, like, do they cancel each other out? That's a very likely scenario. So it's impossible for me to feel confident ever suggesting that, yeah, Will Levis is going to get hot. He's going to play really well this week, and he's going to support 2 guys for 12 fantasy points in PPR. So that's what different. That's why in my mind I'm like, yeah, I love Hopkins, but I can't. I'm going to go with the quarterback. Knowing the matchups are both good, if I had to pick Bateman versus Hopkins or Wilson versus Hopkins, I'm kind of like, I'll just take the upside of the And by the way, Anthony Richardson's back, and so who knows? They could just run a bunch, and that drains the clock. Like, who knows, man? I'm going to go with game flow on that one. I do think that this is something I'm going to watch. Because, like, if Ridley or Hopkins, I want to see who emerges. And granted, I don't have any of them in any of my fantasy leagues, but for DFS, player props, knowing which guy emerges in good matchups can definitely help you get some value in those other formats like DFS, etc. So, all right, before we close out the show, Ben, we'd like to give you the floor. Ben does a lot of work back there. He's down under, just crunching numbers, figuring things out for us, and he posts his starts and sits of the week using the slot versus wide tool. Any players that we haven't talked about today that you featured in your article, let us know, Ben.
Okay, so firstly, Terry McLaurin, very up and down so far this season, but he plays the Ravens, and we already talked about this potentially being a shootout. Absolutely must start Terry McLaurin. They don't really have a wide receiver 2 at the moment. It's just McLaurin and no one else. So McLaurin's a guy you just have to be starting now. T. Higgins also gets a solid matchup. Really like him after last week. He's someone you've got to start. And also Jalen Tolbert is someone that I think I would have over most of the streaming options we talked about. The interesting thing about Tolbert is we kind of think of Brandon Cooks as being the wide receiver 2 for the Cowboys. But in reality, Tolbert had more touches. He outgained him. He had more receptions than Cooks through the first 4 weeks. And now Cooks is on IR. So Tolbert is the clear wide receiver 2. He turned 10 targets into 87 yards and a touchdown last week. Gets a great matchup against the Lions. He's someone I feel pretty good about starting over most of these more streaky guys. On the other hand, wide receiver sits. Michael Pittman, even if he plays, and I think he probably will because that is looking good, Anthony Richardson is back. He takes on the Titans, which is the toughest out-wide wide receiver matchup. I feel like we're going to see more like weeks 1 and 2 Michael Pittman than week 4 Michael Pittman this week. And for that reason, he's not someone I'm willing to touch. Someone else I think you need to be nervous about is George Pickens. He gets a pretty tough out-wide matchup. And last week, he played under 60% of the team's snaps. And it's not like he was injured because Mike Tomlin said this is load management, which is terrible news. I'd rather he was injured. Realistically, this is the first time he's played under 60% of snaps ever in the NFL since he debuted. So I'm not trusting Pickens against the Raiders. This is a situation where they're probably going to run a lot. They're not using Pickens properly now. I don't know what's going on in that situation. The final one that I'm pretty nervous about is Garrett Wilson. I know that Robert Saleh leaving could mean that we see the team explode this week, but it's a really tough matchup against the Bills. The secondary is very good. I feel like if you got that sort of situation where you have quite a few solid wide receivers, Wilson's the guy that I'm probably wanting to sit. I feel like he's got a very low floor relative to what we've seen from most of the guys in that range. People are going to rank him inside the top 15. Every other top 15 wide receiver has a really good floor. Garrett Wilson doesn't.
All right, we got some questions before we close out the show too, and all great insight. Make sure you go check out those articles, Ben's article, and all our articles on Rasball.com. The guys are doing a great job. Starts of the week using our tools over on Rasball. A lot of fun. If honestly, I got to tell you, and I'm not just saying this because it's our site. If you're really struggling for that last wide receiver 3 or flex spot, our site gives you the best like random nuggets to you're like, you know what? I didn't think about a home versus away split, or this team is a huge underdog. This site has wins versus loss splits. Like they're really fun tools to just kind of push you in one way or the other if you're really struggling for that last spot. So go check it out on Rasball.com, and the guys are doing a really good job breaking down the articles. Before we close out the show, we do have some questions. Obviously, epic fail. Quick question: drop one someone for Gibson. You got Tracy, Algier, Ray Davis, and Tolbert. Of course, Gibson is going to be the de facto starter. Ramondre Stevenson out this week. You have Tracy pending Devin Singletary returning. Algier, of course, is got a really good matchup this week, but he's the clear RB2 behind Bijan. And then you also have Ray Davis, who should see more work potentially with James Cook. We'll see what the final say for him is because he could be out Monday. And then you got Jalen Tolbert, who's now emerging with Brandon Cook's injury. Ben, are you dropping one of these guys? And I think a lot of this might have to do with, do you need a start this week? If you need a start, I think Gibson makes the most sense out of most of these guys. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, this is an interesting situation. Gibson's definitely the best start of those 5 guys listed there. Tolbert's obviously a good option as well. Algier, I'm not willing to drop Algier. I feel like he's one of the best handcuffs you can have. If you've read my Streams and Stashes article, you know that I talk about running back stashes all the time. Running back stashes are how you win your league. So you need to have the best running back backups on your bench. Guys like Braylon Allen, guys like Bucky Irving, guys like Tank Bigsby. They're guys I talked about in weeks 1 and 2. If you had them on your bench, all of a sudden you've got a potential starter. So this is a situation with Algier. You need to have him on your bench. You cannot drop him. Tracy versus Ray Davis is interesting because Tracy's probably not playing this week, but we don't definitively know. And if he is playing, he is a solid option. Ray Davis is more likely to play because James Cook hasn't practiced in so far this week at all, but they've got a Monday night game. And so it's very risky waiting on that situation. But I do like Davis's upside. He could potentially take over most of Cook's role without the pass catching. And so for that reason, I'm dropping Tracy simply because you're probably not starting him. Singletary's probably back, and the upside is a lot lower than most of these other guys.
You mean Tracy's not going to start? You mean, right? He's not hurt.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think he was questionable, but he's definitely going to play.
No, he's in. He's not even on the injury report. Maybe unless he came up later, he might.
I think it was limited earlier in the season, but it wasn't. Early in the week, but it wasn't anything serious.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, but either way, right? If Singletary plays, he's kind of useless. I think it's right on the button for me. If you need to start, I think Ty Johnson. And by the way, I could definitely be wrong. I think Ty Johnson could be a lot more involved than people want. With no James Cook, Tolbert to me, to be honest with you, is one of those guys where I think it's going to be matchup dependent. And probably when they're home most of the time. When they have a home game. I know he had a good game against Pittsburgh, which on the road is impressive. And I'm not saying that. But if I need a start this week, I'm probably going to drop Tolbert. I would have to see the full roster. But if I don't need to start, I'm not picking up Gibson. Like, I don't really care. It's 1 week. If I'm not going to start him, there's no point in picking him up. All right, epic fail. So if people don't know, if obviously you watched the show later and you want to know, I had an epic situation a few years ago, no pun intended, where I had like -7 points between my kicker and defense, and that was the time when I realized like I need something. I need something to understand kickers because I got 0 points from a kicker and -7 from a defense one time, and I said I can't do this anymore. I can't, and I lost the week by like 5, which was the most annoying part, and that was when I went on this pilgrimage to look at kicker stats. So I have created a tool which essentially looks at offensive drive stats for defense and offense, and it looks at how many times they score touchdowns, how many times they kick field goals, how many possessions they have, and then I look at the matchup preview. So yeah, this is why I get a lot of the kicker questions because I do actually have something I use, and honestly, it offers the greatest floor I've ever had. It's fantastic. I haven't had under 7 points from a kicker in like 2 years. It is fantastic. I've genuinely enjoyed it. Defense, on the other hand, also very high floor. Very high floor. So I got to admit, I do enjoy the tool. This week, though, is not a great week. I'm sorry, folks. This is not. You're not going to have any fun kicker names. I'm very disappointed. Trust me, I am. The guys that are on the top, the only one that really stood up was Matthew Wright, San Francisco kicker. But Austin Seibert, the kicker for the Commanders, was number one. Younghoe Koo, McPherson, Blake Grupe, New Orleans kicker, is also high up there, and also the Pittsburgh kicker as well, Boswell. So if you can get your hands on Austin Seibert, great. He was like 20% owned, just like earlier this week. So he probably skyrocketed a little bit, but I think he's the number one guy to go get. Blake Grupe against Tampa Bay too is interesting, but there is no Derek Carr. We don't know what the Spencer Rattler situation is, so I tend to try to fade those when I can. If you get your hands on Boswell, and also the Green Bay Packers kicker is also a high floor play as well in that Arizona game. So there's that. All right, Jamie. What's up, Rasball? Jamie, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on. Tempted to start Ridley in some spots, not going to lie. Okay, well, don't lie. We don't want you to start lying, by the way. That's not what we're trying to do here. If you start lying, epic fail, then you're out. So I appreciate you being honest with us here. Ben, I need to throw some of you. I gotta go charge my laptop before it dies. So I got a question for here. Answer this for them. Got Marius. We have Slayton, Pickens, or Ridley. The floor is yours, man. Just give me 1 second while I go get myself a charger.
You got it. Okay, so let's talk about these three guys. Already talked about Pickens a little bit, but we still have to understand when he's on the field, he is still their top wide receiver. So even though there's a lot of risk with him, and even though you shouldn't be starting him in every league like you usually would, he's still probably better than these other two guys. Ridley's got that really low floor because of Levis and because of the way they pass the ball. This offense is just a little bit of a mess. And Darius Slayton, look, I know you're all really excited about Darius Slayton. I get it. He was fantastic last week, but he's not the wide receiver one. Wan'Dale Robinson is their wide receiver one. To give you an idea of just how much a wide receiver one Wan'Dale Robinson is, let me just talk about his targets so far this season. He's had 11, 4, we're not going to talk about that, 8, 14, and 10 targets so far this season. Wan'Dale Robinson is the guy there. You're going to see Darius Slayton in some games. Just like in some games with the Bills last season, you saw Gabe Davis pop up and have massive gains. But you don't suddenly go out and start Gabe Davis over guys that are clear wide receiver ones on their teams. For me, you've got to start George Pickens. I don't feel good about it. You shouldn't feel good about it, but you should feel even worse about the idea of starting Calvin Ridley or Darius Slayton.
I'm going to get weird and start Slayton over Pickens this week.
Ooh, homer pick.
Yeah, baby, let's go. I mean, Daniel Jones just peppered the man in Seattle. That game was wild. I don't even know what's going on. I feel like I blacked out while I watched that game because I was like, what is happening right now? Nothing makes sense anymore. Basically, Timbo, Slice, Patreon talk. We just kind of answered this. Ben's going Pickens. I am going Slayton here. By the way, is that the same? You have like the? Oh, I guess it kind of answers the question. Perfect. All right. Pickett snap count last game. Where honestly, it really. You hope it's like a Ramondre Stevenson thing, right? Oh, Stevenson, sorry, you're no longer the starter. Well, how'd that work out? Yeah, he just gets all the touches. Of course, he just got hurt. But the Pickett thing, and by the way, for Justin Fields, like he's throwing to Van Jefferson out there. Like, I mean, why is it that Justin Fields, like every coaching staff's like, this guy's not good. Let's give him no weapons, though. Like, let's give Justin Fields no weapons to work with. Pickens, by the way, you're off the field. You're going to throw to the guy, Van Jefferson, who's been cut from multiple teams. No one wanted him. He's now your top guy on the outside. It's just like, it's insane. Absolutely insane. We're never going to know. We're never going to know how good Justin Fields is. We're never going to know. Honestly, by the way, this week against the Raiders, he's playing against his old OC. I love the dynamic of like, hey, I'm the guy. It was you that was the problem, and going out there and trying to prove something. But who the hell is he throwing to? And if he has a bad first half, he will be benched for Russell Wilson. So all risk, baby, no reward. What's the best site for all your fantasy football needs? Rasball. Jamie, by the way, honestly, like Jamie's just trying to get on the payroll right there. I love it. I love every second of it. Clarity. Hopefully to give you clarity on this question, Clarity. Full PPR, do I drop Bigsby to start Slayton in place of Olave? Ooh, I would not want to do that. I guess the question is, what do you have other than this, right, Ben? I mean, my mindset is, what's the rest of the roster? Are you going to take a 0 because you don't start anybody? Yeah, I don't know if I want to do that. What's your thoughts?
I don't understand the reason behind doing this. This feels like that sort of situation where you're just overreacting to one thing that happened. Look, Olave probably won't have a good week this week, but he's still the clear wide receiver one, and has a very, very, very high ceiling. Now, we know Slayton has a high ceiling as well, but realistically, like Spencer Rattler is not going to be very conservative. He is going to air the ball out at times, and Olave could be involved when that happens. So Olave could still potentially produce as Slayton could. I'm going to have Olave ranked 20 to 30 places higher than Slayton. To me, they're not particularly close. And I can't imagine a situation where you would want to drop a good player for somebody that you're only going to use for 1 week. Because as soon as Malik Neighbors is back, no one's thinking about Darius Slayton anymore. This is at most a 1 or 2 week rental. On the other hand, Tank Bigsby, he got more snaps and more touches than Travis Etienne last week. He is turning into the starter, or at the very least, it's a committee in Jacksonville. Certainly, it's entirely possible that Bigsby turns into someone that you can start each week or at least use as a viable bye-week guy. So, no, don't do this. Definitely don't do this.
I agree. And by the way, clarity provides clarity. Look at that. Yeah, if you already have Wan'Dale, I'd rather just play Wan'Dale. Ben made up a really good point here about the targets. The Cincinnati game should be high scoring. Like, honestly, Slayton, I feel like his whole value is tied to Malik Neighbors, which is Wan'Dale kind of has his own standalone value. So I'm not going to drop Wan'Dale or drop a player. I'd rather just start Wan'Dale, call it a day. I think that's the easy way. But honestly, I'd probably play Olave. I'm rolling with Rattler. Let's go. Let's get weird. I know it's a little I mean, it's not like Olave with Derek Carr has been lighting it up per se. I mean, it's crazy how good he's been with Shaheed and not with Olave, but neither here or there. But yeah, I think that's in my mindset is just keep Wan'Dale, start him, or I would play Olave over both those guys. Just I think Spencer Rattler, we're taking a leap of faith on him, but the matchup's good for New Orleans. I mean, just look what happened in Tampa last week. So, I mean, Darnell, I'm pretty sure Kirk Cousins threw for 500 yards. So, there's all that. Ben, do you agree, disagree?
Totally agree.
All right. We got Roshan. Obviously, Jamie just loves talking about Roshan. Honestly, Jamie, just change your name. Jamie Johnson. JJ. There we go. You already got a nickname. That's exciting stuff. I love every second of it. Marius said drop Sermon for Slayton. I probably will. If this is a start question, I'm probably going to start Sermon. I'm good with him. He got the touches. I know you're a big Sermon guy. You agree?
Yeah, look, Sermon, I think I was the highest person on Fantasy Pros on Sermon last week. I've been massive on Sermon since the preseason. The Colts has a really good run offense. It's not just Jonathan Taylor. It's the Colts. They have a good O-line. They scheme it up well. You're going to get production whenever you start the Colts running back. And the reality is that when Taylor's out, Sermon is the Colts running back. I know they use Goodson a lot in the passing game, certainly on passing downs, but Sermon still had 6 receptions last week, so it's not like he's being unused there as well. Sermon is one of the best running back backups in the league, and running back backups are really, really, really valuable. Don't drop your running back backups just for an average wide receiver, an average player of some other position. You've got to keep these guys because when their injury happens to the guy ahead of them, all of a sudden you've got a locked-in starter like you should have with Sermon in the right matchup.
Yeah, and I think the benefit of Slayton this week, Slayton's like hey, I don't have any option. Like, I don't want to start a player that's average, wide receiver 4 in a bad matchup. I'd rather go out and pick up Slayton and start him. But the established players, like Sermon, is going to start. I mean, we know he's going to get the workload in the Colts game. So, yeah, I think Slayton is like the in case of shatter the glass in case of emergency type player where you're like, all right, I'm okay with it, but I'm not going to be starting him over. Like, I know I talked about Pickens, but Pickens hasn't played well and he doesn't have a good matchup. I know the Raiders aren't a great defense, but they are a slot funnel defense. So I don't love it for Pickens there as well. All right, that's all we got today, folks. We really do appreciate you jumping on and joining the show for the slots for starts and sits, the SWAT versus wide analysis. We did have a question on Instagram for the first time. Someone asked, who has a higher floor, Rome Odunze or Leggett? I think Rome Odunze's kind of shown that he has a high floor, so I'm not overly concerned. Leggett, by the way, I got to admit, I actually am impressed. I was not really a big Leggett guy, but he came in and he started playing really well with Dalton before he got hurt. So that's something there for Dynasty especially. I do like that as well. But before we close out the show, Ben, tell the people where they can find your content and what else you got upcoming at Raswell and everywhere else.
Firstly, I am a massive Xavier Leggett fan because I had him in college fantasy last year, and he was fantastic. So I was massive on him going into the draft. Really happy with him, but he doesn't have as much upside as a Roma Dunze, who's literally a top 10 pick. As for my stuff, well, look, you know my articles, slot versus wide analysis on the Razzball website. Go check that out. Streamers and stashes on the Razzball website. Go check that out. If you're interested in my rankings, go over to ffdfantasyfootball.com. You can also check out my YouTube channel where I kind of do a longer form analysis of my rankings each week, kind of like half an hour breaking down all my rankings and who's a risk, who you should start in different situations. So definitely go check that out as well. And I use all the Razzball tools on the Razzball website. So I suggest that you use the Razzball tools on the Razzball website as well.
Nice. Bullseye, we see you, man. Obviously, I know you jumped in here late. We do want to just get to your question, too, before we close out. Ben, I'm going to give you Najee Harris or Chase Brown. And by the way, Bullseye, I recommend you join us on Sunday. We have a 2-hour start sit show. We'll have all the injury information, the weather updates, everything we need to know up until kickoff. That's the best time to answer your start sit questions. But Ben's not on the show, so I'm going to let Ben have the floor here. Ben, what do you got?
I think the biggest risk here is it looks like Zach Moss probably going to play. If that happens, this is not even close. If Zach Moss is out, I think this is significantly closer, but I think Trevion Williams is going to get most of the passing downs because they don't give Chase Brown any blocking snaps at all. They're not happy to have him in there blocking. They don't trust him to do that job. So for that reason, I'm going to use Najee Harris. It's a good matchup. Even if Jalen Warren's back, I don't think Warren's going to be healthy enough to threaten the amount of snaps Harris would get. So I'm starting Najee Harris.
I wrote up Harris on my article for starts of the week. So there you go, folks. All right, that's all we got today. We really appreciate you joining us again on the Razzball Fantasy YouTube channel. Make sure you jump over to IG and TikTok. And, of course, make sure you jump over to razzball.com. We have fantastic tools and articles, everything you need to win your fantasy league. I want to thank my co-host today, Ben Wasley. Go follow him at Fantasy First Down and drop that O on Twitter. And make sure you follow me at Bobby LaMarco. Keep that O. We are out of here, folks.